Candyman is back for new generations, and that's all I hear about walking around the streets. Candyman, 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 but can this one measure up to the original? I'm not saying it 5 times in a row. Hello everybody, I'm Dan Murrell here with my thoughts on the newest Candyman movie, which after being delayed for quite a while due to the pandemic is now actually hitting theaters this weekend. This is directed by DaCosta. This is her second feature film after 2018's Little Woods. She will also be at the helm of the Marvels in the Marvel Cinematic Universe very soon, so a big jump up as far as budget for DaCosta in the very near future. The script is by DaCosta along with Win Rosenfeld, who's the head of Jordan Peele's Monkey Paw Productions, and Jordan Peele himself, who gets co-writing credit. This movie is what I'll call a follow-up to 1992's Candyman, starring horror icon Tony Todd as the Candyman, a vengeful ghost out for blood after his murder several decades earlier. Like the original movie, this movie is set in Chicago's former Cabrini Green projects, which has now been gentrified and is home to struggling artist Anthony McCoy, who's played by Yahya Abdul-Mateen II. Anthony finds artistic inspiration in the urban legends around the Candyman, and this results in new sightings and new attacks. Is the Candyman back? Is there a copycat running around? Is something more afoot? That's the mystery that we have to unravel at the heart of this film. Tiana Paris plays Brianna, who's Anthony's live-in girlfriend and also an art gallery manager, and Coleman Domingo shows up as the local expert on the Candyman killings. If you're worried that this movie is just a cheap exploitation of established IP, like we've seen many other times, basically slapping a name onto a movie to throw in some cheap jump scares and make a few quick bucks, let me allay your fears right now. This is not what is going on with this version of Candyman. This movie actually doubles down on what I find to be the most interesting aspect of the original film, which is the Candyman's roots in generational violence and racially inspired violence in particular. This movie explores that aspect of the Candyman lore much more deeply, and it adds in issues like, as I mentioned before, gentrification and its effects on the neighborhood, and the effects of this generational violence not only on individual victims, but on the people as a whole. But Candyman isn't just a societal critique, although it would be interesting if that was the only thing that was going on here. It actually works as a really good horror movie as well, and there are several very inventively staged kill sequences. If you're a gore hound, there's some great blood effects. It's not all CGI blood spatter. And what I find most impressive about an effective horror film, especially nowadays, is that I don't think that there is one jump scare in the entire film. It's all done with inventive staging and things like, suspense and drama and getting you invested in the characters. There's some great camera work and visual tricks. I hate jump scares generally as a horror fan, and the fact that you didn't have any in this movie and yet you still managed to creep me out and scare me, I respect the movie just that much more for that reason alone. It's not just about the violence, it's not just about society, it's also about these characters. We get to learn more about the legend and the lore of the Candyman. There are so many extra levels that are added on here, and not in that Michael Myers way where it seems to complicate the backstory. You have to add in, why is he unkillable? And you have to add in all these druids and stuff like that. It actually enhances this character. It goes back, when you look back at the first film now, I think it makes it an even better film because you realize that we've only seen part of the story so far. If you're not familiar with the first Candyman film, or it's been a while since you saw it, I would recommend familiarizing yourself with it before you go see this movie. It's not required, but I do think that the story is going to be that much richer if you have the events of the 1992 original in your head. I actually watched it the night before I went to see this new version of Candyman, and I was really glad that I did because everything was very fresh in my mind, and there's some deep pulls and some deep callbacks that you're going to be able to appreciate that much more in this movie. The cast in general is outstanding, but Yahya Abdul-Mateen II gets center stage in this movie, and I think it continues to prove why he is one of the most underrated actors working today. I really think that his performance in The Trial of the Chicago 7, people really slept on that last year. Everyone was buzzing around Sacha Baron Cohen and a lot of the other ones in that ensemble, but I thought his performance was one that stuck with me the most, and I'm hoping that the fact that he gets center stage in this movie is going to put him on more people's radar, because I really do think that we're going to see a lot of great things, and he's got a lot of big projects lined up in the next year or two. I wouldn't say that he's going to break out as a star, because I'd say a good number of people know him. He's been the bad guy in a major comic book movie, but I think we're getting closer to him being much more of a household name than he is today, and it's not off the back of just being in some big movies. It's off the back of doing great work in lots of different movies. I have a complicated relationship with horror movies, but I really do appreciate good ones, and I think that Candyman is a really solid horror movie. And I really resent it when people think that a good genre film has to be empty calories, as if it can't have something to say. And I think that those that might eye roll at the concept of the fact that this movie does talk about violence, police brutality, the effects of gentrification, the minimization of African Americans in large cities, cultural appropriation, all of these different themes, they were all present in the original 1992 Candyman film. So if you're going to roll your eyes at the inclusion of it in this movie, you're really ignorant of the roots of this franchise and where it came from. Candyman is a very unique franchise, and especially when you hone in that first movie. Yes, it went into much more of a slasher direction as we got into sequels, but of all of the different quote-unquote slashers, I think that the Candyman origin story is the one that has the most grit and dirt behind it, where you can really say something important, something tied to the real world, instead of just talking about guys with knives for fingers and machetes walking around and killing teenagers. And what Jordan Peele and Nia DaCosta and the team behind this movie have done is to dig into this legend and really give us something to think about. This is a non-spoiler review, and I haven't really gone into too many details, so I'll wrap up the non-spoiler portion by saying that if you are a fan, first and foremost, of the Candyman franchise, I think you're really going to like this movie because it adds so much to what you already know about these movies. If you're a horror fan, I think you're going to like it because, as I mentioned, there's really inventive kills, some really creepy atmosphere, some great blood gags, etc. So if that's what you go for, I think you're going to enjoy it. And then just on a movie level, I think it's really cleverly written. As I said, I think it has something to say, and it's the rare horror movie that I don't forget on my way home from the theater. Even horror movies that I like a lot, they don't necessarily always have a whole lot to them, just the enjoyment of being on that roller coaster ride. Candyman actually has me thinking about it, which is why I want to go into spoiler territory here. So if you want to jump off now and don't want to know anything about what happens in the film, I would recommend that because there's a lot of great surprises to be found as the movie unfolds. But if you've already seen the movie and you want to hear me talk just a little bit about where this movie goes ultimately, then I want to jump into that right now. So final warning, we are about to broach spoiler territory, so abandon ship now if you want to stay unspoiled. Okay, now that we've just got the spoiler hounds here, and again, I hope that it's just people that have seen the movie so far, I really want to talk about what I love the most about this film and why I say that I think it's a step above the average horror movie, which is that it doesn't take just the regular people characters and have some character development there. We actually get a huge turn in the nature of the character of Candyman. I like the fact that we broaden it out past Tony Todd's character in the first film. We meet so many of the different, it's almost this like Ghostbusters 2 thing with, like, you know, the fact that the slime has built up over decades. This is the idea that there's been so much injustice and brutality and cruelty in this neighborhood that Candyman has been so many different people, and every iteration of Candyman just adds to this legend. But the thing that they all have in common is that they are the product of this brutality, of this injustice, most of it racial injustice in this Cabrini Green neighborhood for decades and decades and decades. And yet, because the population has really been shoved there by the people in power, and you have mainly African Americans, a minority population, when the Candyman is unleashed, he is victimizing the very people that have already been victimized by this brutality and that have been pushed into these housing projects. I love that this movie takes that concept and turns it on its head. Candyman is a literal manifestation of prejudice and racism, even going into the original Candyman movie, and I was struck even more by this when I revisited the film last night. The first movie is basically about cultural appropriation. You have Virginia Madsen coming in and trying to appropriate this urban legend of the Candyman for her own use as a research project to, the intelligentsia at this college. And yet she is herself then drawn into the Candyman saga. And her life ends with an act of sacrifice, of self-sacrifice, to literally give back to this community because she sees now the horrific and brutal treatment that they've been subjected to for so many years. I think it was smart to bring Burke in, who's played by Coleman Domingo, as the key figure here because he's the old-timer. He's the one that's lived in Cabrini Green for so long, and he's seen that the neighborhood has changed. And you have this plan, this master plan of his. He looks around, he sees the gentrified neighborhood, and he sees this opportunity to bring the Candyman back, only this time he won't be victimizing the people who have already been victims for so long. All of the new people, as he says, they're the ones, many of them, who have been bringing this violence to the Cabrini Green neighborhood and have plunged the property value down so low that they can now afford to move in and gentrify the place. And so this is now turning the Candyman for the first time against some of those who have been perpetrating this abuse, including, as we see at the end of this film, the police officers who just earlier had come in and killed Anthony for no reason. Candyman, at the end of this film, turns from a neighborhood devil into an avenging angel. And this last command that we see as Tony Todd finally makes his appearance to tell everyone is not a threat, it's an instruction, because he is now an agent of supernatural justice, supernatural vengeance. And there is the conversation to be had about justice versus vengeance, etc. But that's not the conversation that this movie is trying to have. What this is about is a perpetuation of the cycle of violence and about how it had been a one-way street for decades in this neighborhood. And this movie is about making it a two-way street, reversing that flow, allowing people to understand what it's like to be victimized, allowing people to understand what it's like to have an unstoppable force coming after you. And I think that that's such a smart and such a really interesting way to take this character. And I was so happy to see this end result because, you hear that Jordan Peele is involved. Obviously, the expectations are high because particularly the two films that he's directed, I've really loved both of them. I think Get Out is on a different level from us, and that's not slander against us. It's just that I think that Get Out is that much that's a movie that I find more and more in every time that I watch it. But to see him kind of handing the reins over in a way to Nia DaCosta and the way that she is able to pull off this movie, I really think that it is one of those rare horror sequels that is worthy of the original and builds on it and actually makes it into a coherent saga. It reminded me a little bit of how I felt about Dr. Sleep, the way that I think it takes what Kubrick did in The Shining and builds on that in a way that makes the first movie a more full experience. Here, if you were to watch 1992's Candyman and this Candyman back to back, they create one big meta story and they really work together. I just think that it's such a great way, and it just goes to show you that reboots and sequels that come many decades later aren't necessarily a bad thing if you have a creative team that has a passion for the subject and really has a story, a direction to take the story that's compelling, that actually makes you go, oh wow, they really upped the ante here. That's what they did with Candyman, and I'm so happy that they pulled it off because I was really, really happy with this film, and I can't wait to revisit it and then really do a double feature with the first movie and this movie, playing them as one big story altogether. So that wraps up my review of Candyman. Are you going to see it this weekend? Did you already see it? What are your thoughts? Let me know down in the comments below. And as always, thank you so much for watching. If you want to see even more of what I'm up to, you can check me out on Patreon at patreon.com/Dan Murrell. And stay tuned right here to the channel. I've got some reviews coming up soon of a few streaming movies. There are some great options if you're watching movies at home on these different streaming services. I'm going to be highlighting a few of them in the next few days. We also have Charts with Dan coming up on Monday. We've got Shang-Chi coming out next week. I'll have a review when that comes out. Lots of great stuff coming up. Thank you so much for watching. Stay safe, and I'll see you next time.